Take Charge Parenting with the Kids Doctor is brought to you by Children's Health.
Earlier, we showed you back-to-school electronics, and now we want your kids to get back on a good sleep routine. We've got the experts who can help. Award-winning pediatrician and medical editor of KidsDoctor.com. It's Dr. Sue Hubbard. Of course, we know Dr. Sue Hubbard and Dr. David Brown, a psychologist and sleep disorder specialist with Children's Health. Welcome. I am so excited. I know a lot of parents are also, to help these kids get back into a routine.
You know, it's really important that we already start talking about back to school because it's only a month away, amazingly. And many children, especially children who are over the preschool age, are not on any sort of schedule right now. So this is a time to already start resetting their schedule and their bedtime clock.
Okay, so how many hours of sleep should maybe children get a night? They might not be getting that now during summer hours.
Right. Ideally, a preschooler gets somewhere between 10 and 13 hours of sleep a night.
Wow.
School-age children, 9 to 11 hours. You know, teenagers are the hardest group to get a good night's sleep, but they still really need 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And young adults, many are still in high school and in college, we talk about this, 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. And sleep, we know, impacts so many parts of our lives, Alana. So it impacts focus, attention, your learning, your mood. So it's really important that our kids are getting back on a good schedule.
Okay, and even your weight. I know whenever I don't get enough sleep, I feel very fatigued the very next day. Dr. Brown, should parents be focused on wake time as well?
Absolutely. Particularly towards the end of the summer, bedtime is important, but we can make kids go to bed. We can't really make them fall asleep. But wake time, we can wake them up, get them up. And the most important factor that controls our internal clock is light. So children getting bright light in the morning will ultimately help them fall asleep earlier in the evening. So I focus more on moving their wake time earlier as school approaches.
Interesting. Okay, so that's maybe a tip to reestablish some good bedtime routines. Do you have any more for us?
Sure. I mean, the environment is critically important, just as morning light is what helps set the clock earlier at night. Evening light does just the opposite, and particularly blue light. Regular lights don't have a lot of blue, but electronics are pretty heavy in the blue spectrum. And there's a special cell in the retina of the eye that goes directly to our clock, and blue light is like a dose of caffeine to kids.
Wow.
So we recommend backing off on electronics a couple of hours before bedtime. A bedtime routine is important because bedtime for little children is a lot like timeout. And so we make bedtime pleasant, short, sweet, something they look forward to.
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal, but it is inevitable that there will be early morning meltdowns. And so what would you suggest the best way to deal with those meltdowns?
Well, little kids have a fair amount of meltdowns, primarily because they're triggered by not getting what they want, and they haven't developmentally gotten to a point where they can express themselves many other ways other than screaming and crying. The two things that will make meltdowns more likely is not getting enough sleep and being hungry. And so meltdowns are going to be particularly common in the morning, particularly if we're waking our kids up. Typically, the part of the brain that is rational or reasonable is not working in the midst of a meltdown. So there's no point in trying to rationalize with a kid when they're screaming and yelling. And a parent will often demonstrate their own frustration by getting angry. That doesn't seem to help either. The best thing is, if the kid is safe, try to ignore the behavior as much as you can. Certainly don't give in to the behavior, because that might be the easiest way out, but what you're going to do is train that child to throw tantrums to get their way. I think the best thing, though, is try to anticipate when they're going to have a tantrum, look at the signs, and try to distract the child before they get into that full-blown emotional meltdown.
You get ahead of it. I
Absolutely.
see. Okay. Well, there's a new study linking sleep to obesity. So what do parents need to know to try and avoid that?
This was a really interesting study that was just released in the last month out of Ohio State University, and they looked at about 1,000 children, and they looked at children who were preschoolers and at bedtimes, children who went to bed by 8 o'clock versus children who went to bed after 9 p.m., and then they followed them until 15 years of age. And do you know that the children who went to bed before 8 o'clock at night, the toddlers and preschoolers, were half as likely to be obese as teenagers?
Wow.
So I think this is another really important point. We know there's some relationship, there might be a protective effect, and Dr. Brown's the expert and can talk about some of the changes that go on in the body.
Well, if you...
Well, I was actually going to mention that I was, well, go ahead. Actually, go ahead.
We know that if you limit sleep time, you affect physiologically what's happening inside. That if you hold healthy young men to 4 hours of sleep in as little as 4 nights, you can measurably change their insulin resistance, their glucose tolerance. You put them in a pre-diabetic state. It also changes 2 hormones, leptin and ghrelin, which are important for appetite and metabolism. And it makes the brain think you need many more carbohydrates than you need. And so that's why when you're sleep deprived, you start craving sugary foods.
Well, there you go. And that's why I crave sugary foods all the time. So parents, it is our responsibility. Thank you so much for this great information. We need to get a hold of this now while they're at a young age. And, you know, maybe if they're a teen, something that we can start doing now. Get those electronics away and get them into bed sooner. For more information on a stress-free, healthy school year, log on to childrens.com/back-to-school. And you can also follow Children's Health and the Kids Doctor on Twitter. And you bet they're also on Facebook.
Just like your